uh, giving your afternoon to books and in particular to translation. When I was growing up in Bangalore in the 90s and 2000s, there was an implicit, in some cases explicit, caste system in which books by Indians published in English tended to have been written originally in English. And those of us who read in English were often reading in ignorance of the vast amount of literature written in India that wasn't in English. What I think is not always acknowledged is that this has, to a remarkable degree, reversed. And it's a reversal that's happened over the past 10 or 15 years. And the two people who are with us today have played important roles in that. Vivek Shanbhag's Keshava was published in English just about exactly a decade ago. And as I remember it, it didn't arrive to much fanfare. I wrote the first review, I think, in English of that book, and it was only 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months later that you'd see, just by word of mouth, that this had become a bit of a sensation. And Keshava was the book, more than any other, that showed English language readers what they were missing out on. Fast forward 10 years, Heart Lamp, also a translation from the Kannada. Also, like Keshava, a book with no exact equivalent in Kannada. These are both books that only exist in English. We'll come back to that. Translated by Deepa Bhasthi, became the first book with an Indian translator to win the International Booker Prize, and took Kannada writing all over the country and all over the world. Now, how did this happen? How did this reversal happen? Many people played a role. But above all, it happened because of translators, because of translation. There have always been translators, so obviously something has changed. So I want to start with Deepa, and let's begin with the personal. So, how you became a translator, what your path to this translation was.
Thank you, Keshava. Hi, everyone. So I think this is a story common to many, many translators, that we all come to this by accident, not necessarily out of choice. And we continue because we find something in the play between languages that interests us. And that's how I arrived at translation as well. So I'm sure many of us here, I studied I had entire education was in a English medium education system. And over the years, what I noticed was happening was I was losing sort of the connection that I had with Kannada. Kannada is my mother tongue. And Kannada, somewhere along the way, had become a very functional language. It was a language I spoke with my parents, with my town people, it was very functional, so I didn't really have that sort of connection to it. And as I grew older, it was a connection that I deeply felt the loss of. And it started, so my interest in translation started with Kodagina Gauramma, whose works, I had kind of heard about but not really read any stories of. And way back I think this was in 2012, her birth centenary year, that I'd read a feature on her, and I thought I'm going to finish translating her 21 stories in 6 months and get it published. But anyway, it took me 10 years to get to actually publishing the book. And somewhere along the way, I realized that the more I was translating from Kannada, the closer I felt to the language. So I remembered words, and I was using words which I hadn't used for maybe decades. So the connection became stronger, and that's what sort of sparked my interest in choosing to continue to translate.
So, one of the distinctive things about Karnataka is the number of languages that are spoken here. And so, for example, we have here someone who's Kannada mother tongue, who writes in English, Deepa, and someone who's Konkani mother tongue, but writes in Kannada, Vivek. And, we are negotiating, translating constantly in our state, particularly in parts of the coastal areas of the state where so many languages are spoken. Vivek, coming to you as a writer, in your kind of early years as a writer, because Keshava appears in English maybe 30 years after you start. I don't know when you start publishing, probably 25, 30 years after you start publishing in Kannada. what was, did you think about translation at all, or were you just focused on your own Kannada writing, or were you thinking? I mean, we were just talking about English here, but why did it take 30 years for your work to start appearing in English?
First of all, it was availability of time, because many of my stories were translated even before Gajargochar. But I was not very happy with the translation because I felt there is something that was missing there. And I felt it is my involvement in translation. And at the time of Gajargochar, before that, I used to work for a corporate house, and then I used to work for Unilever. I quit my job to be a full-time writer. At that time, I felt that I must spend some time on my translation of my work. So that is how the Gajargochar came in. It was not the latest book at that point in time. It was the shortest of all my works, so which is why I picked it up. So, of course, then, Srinath, I knew Srinath, and he is a creative writer, though he has not published a book in fiction. And then I asked him, because I felt his sensibility, his language is something that is close to my sensibility. And his first language is English. And I believe that for the translators, their first language must be the target language. I think it's very important. A lot of people ask me, why don't I translate my works into English? Because I don't have that relationship with English. It is important to have that relationship with a language if you want to translate or if you want to write fiction. I have written non-fiction, but that's a different thing. So I went to Srinath, and that's how it happened. And as I said, the most important thing for me at that point in time was to work with the translator and then see what it means. And also this, till then all my translators, they were not, the first language was, except for one, first language was not English.
And that relationship, therefore, has continued, and that's that writer, in your case, the writer-translator is a real relationship. It is a collaboration.
Yeah, it is. See, it is not that I sit and explain to him the word or sentence of a book, but the good translation is always, you bring unsaid in a work into another language. And that's a huge challenge, because unless you really understand what is below the surface in a work, it is not possible to bring this unsaid into English. So my conversations with Srinath, also we are good friends, that a lot of times we don't talk about my work, but what I have read, what he has read. So generally the discussion is always on what we have read and what my views are. And then of course then it steers into my writing and specifics. But it is important for him to understand what my style is, what my stance is, what language I use, why there are repetitions, because it comes out in the conversation. So I think that understanding that is very important for any translation to succeed. It's not about knowing English or good English or good, there's something more to it. Something more is required, and that more is this, I feel.
Deepa, in your case, you've translated both writers who are past as well as living writers. In the case of Banu Mushtaq, could you tell us a bit more about, was it a collaboration of this kind with a lot of back and forth?
Certainly, I mean, there is a difference when you're working with a writer who's still with us. With Banu, of course, there is it was any translation, I think, is a collaboration, whether the author is around or not, But with Banu, it was almost kind of like a hands-free sort of working relationship. Of course, she was always around if I had to ask her something or wanted some clarifications and so on. But it was not so much as not an everyday, not talk, all the time, that sort of thing. I think again, for me, what is very interesting is the differences that come with each of the texts that one translates. Because I think there is your relationship with the book and there is your relationship with the author. So that's an interesting, and I'm sure that also feeds into what the finished product ends up reading like.
Sometimes I'll tell Srinath, I don't want to talk to you because I reveal so many secrets as a writer. Because we all have our own things, it is very private when you write. There are certain things. But then if you don't reveal it, it won't be affected.
Do you think, Vic, that working with Srinath and the awareness, because now anything new that you write, there's a very high chance that it ends up in English by him. Has that affected how you approach your own writing?
Not really, because fortunately for me, by the time I published Ghachar Gochar, most of my, not most, many of my works were published. I had already published 4 novels, so it's behind me. So I don't have that pressure on me. But if Ghachar Gochar was my first book, maybe I would have had that kind of pressure. The other thing is, as a creative process, as I said, a few minutes ago, that relationship with a language is very critical. And if you have that relationship, that means there is an understanding of who your reader is. For me, I have a lot of clarity about who my reader is in Kannada. I have no clarity about who my reader is in English. And I think when you engage with a work, this is very critical.
So Deepa, who was your reader? Like, not just with Heart Lab, but all the works that you've done. Who is your reader that you're translating for?
The non-Kannadiga. When I say non-Kannadiga, not just someone who does not understand Kannada, but also someone who maybe doesn't read in Kannada, because there are many of us who might not necessarily read in Kannada as well. So anyone who cannot read the original, because I always say this: if someone can read Kannada, I would rather they read the original text, no matter which one it is.
But no, so there's no distinction between. I mean, that could be whether it's a South Indian reader, a reader who isn't Indian at all. You're able to hold those all in your head at one time.
Not really. I mean, it doesn't really affect me so much. I don't think I would want to translate something just for a non-Indian reader or just for a non-Kannadiga reader, but someone from South Asia. I don't want to make those distinctions. So there's someone who might read it in Kannada, and there's someone who cannot read Kannada.
But so the session is called Taking Bhasha to the World. So when you sit down to translate, that's not your that's not what's motivating you.
Not really. So for me, I'm interested in introducing the Kannada linguistic culture to a reader who's not familiar with that particular landscape. So, and I firmly believe that it's all right to challenge the reader to immerse themselves in the text and not have to over-explain things and gloss everything.
Got a practical question for both of you, and I think this, because most of our audience here probably aren't familiar with the back sort of the behind the curtain view of publishing. Who is the final authority? Like, let's say there's a disagreement between the writer and the translator on a major or minor point. Who finally gets to decide?
In my experience, it's me.
Deepa?
I think it's collaborative that way. I mean, because I'm sure even with Banu, some places obviously no one will agree on every single point. So there is that discussion. Sometimes she saw where I was coming from. Sometimes I understood what she was trying to say. So I think it's a case-to-case negotiation between, and that comes, I think, when there is that element of trust between the author and the translator.
But this sounds like it makes it easier. It's easier to deal with dead authors.
Yeah, but I must also say Srinath is a very high-quality translator. He is a top-class translator. My experience with Srinath has been completely different.
Coming to something very different, Vivek, your relationship to translation is not only as a writer who is translated, or like all of us, a reader of books in translation. You've also been a editor and publisher of translations yourself. You ran the pioneering Kannada magazine Deshakala, which published translations of fiction from other Indian languages, fiction, probably poetry as well. And now you've got a new venture which is entirely dedicated to translation, which maybe you can tell us a bit about. So could you starting with Deshakala?
See, Deshakala was a literary magazine which I started about 20 years ago. Yeah, exactly 20 years ago. And it's a Kannada literary magazine. It was a Kannada literary magazine. And there was a section in Deshakala, it was called Bhasha. The idea of that section was to bring in translations, bring in works from other Indian languages into Kannada directly. And I was, and the purpose was also to that I bring in the best works, not only the best works, but something that would inspire Kannada writers, something that is not there in Kannada, something that's new to Kannada. And when I started this, I have so many friends in other languages, and I was very confident that I have read a lot of literature in translation. I know about Indian languages. That was the position I started with. But actually, when I started to get down to work, I realized that I knew very little about Indian languages. We mistake it for having friends in other languages, thinking that we know that language, we know the literature of that language. It is not true. I had so many friends, I used to talk to them about Malayalam literature. It doesn't mean I know Malayalam literature. If I have to pick one piece, it was so difficult because and in those days, not much was available in translation. And so I had to really form a group of people in each of these languages, discuss with them, and get some translations, rough translations, some even translated into Kannada, just to understand, some even into English, some even into Hindi, to understand which piece to pick. And that gave me enormous insight into what lies there. Not that I understand, but what lies there. And I think 80% of my time in editing Deshakala went into these 20 pages. It was a great experience for me. If I have to pick one thing that Deshakala has given to me, it is this.
And now the sequel or the child of Deshakala?
I would say that it is Hyphen. Hyphen is an initiative we have just started. It's part of what is called Bahuvachana Trust. And Hyphen is meant for translation from Indian language into English. So it has three parts. One is a literary journal called Hyphen, and it is meant for translation from Indian language into English. All Indian languages, whether they are in the age schedule or not, every Indian language which has literature. And I would even want to go slightly beyond to say even if it is oral. Because there are very interesting stories and they also reflect a kind of worldview and mindset. The second part of that is publication, a publishing house which will focus again on translation from Indian language into English. And the third one is a digital arm which will have an online bookshop only meant for translations into English. So the idea is to create a space where people can go and appreciate the literature of Indian languages. And it is not an academic journal. The idea is to make it accessible, and the only consideration is the literary quality of the work.
But why? So this time it's only into English. That's
because if I get into any other area, it is too large for me to handle. It's very.
It's because Vivek, in the past you've spoken about how really the first option for any Indian who wants to read a book that is in any Indian language should be to read the translation in the language which they already read. So let's say there's a Tamil novel. I'm probably better off in the Malayalam translation than I am an English translation.
That is true, because starting from even the structure of the language, that the translation is much more effective when you do between two languages. Yeah, for example, most of the Indian languages have verb at the end of the sentence. In English, it comes at the beginning or in the middle. And it might seem like a cliched thing, it may seem like a small issue, but for a creative writer, it's very important. You take your reader through the sentence, and only when your eye hits the verb is the meaning of the sentence is revealed. And I keep giving this example, I love you. In Indian languages, it's I, you, love. Till you say love, you don't know whether it is hate or love. Yeah, so it's very important. I mean, when you work within the language, that's something that we work on, and it is completely lost because you have to reveal it at the beginning in English. So the experience that a user gets when they read my work in Kannada and what they get in English is different. Which is why I say the book is in so many languages, but every language I say it's a different book, because the memories that are evoked by the same sentence in English are different when it is read in Kannada, when it is read in Hindi, and when it is something else.
And one last point on this before I move back to Deepa. in many of those languages, it has not been translated directly from Kannada.
True. Yeah, except in Hindi and Konkani, it is not.
So English is kind of the clearinghouse through which it
Yeah.
passes.
See, the reality today is that we don't have direct translations between Indian languages. Not don't have, but there was a time when even in Canada, people went to Calcutta and translated from Bangla into Kannada. There is a top-class translation of Rabindranath Tagore's works directly from Bangla into Kannada. All his stories. Many of Bashir's works, many of Malayalam and Tamil writers are available in direct translations. It has changed over a period of time for two things. One is the English education. Second is the border areas, the language politics and the rhetoric. As a result, there were many, the schools that were in border areas, like there were Malayalam schools in Karnataka, there were Marathi schools in Karnataka, there were Kannada schools in Maharashtra. All that is, drying up. And there is no funding there, so people are not going into these schools. And all our translators came from these areas. So the impact is seen in last 25 years. And I don't think we have any other way of appreciating our own literature other than going through English. I mean, it is inevitable, it is not the best way, but I think that is the only way, going forward.
Deepa, to this point about the difference in sentence structure, you're translating between two syntactically, lexically, very different languages. And you've talked about translating with an accent. So tell us more what you mean by that and how you approach this vast gulf between languages.
Right. So Kannada couldn't be more different from English. And the way, I'm sure all of us understand this, that any two languages, especially two that are as diverse as Kannada and English, work very, very differently. Not just, starting with the grammatical structure to where the verb comes and so on. So I wouldn't change, something like I love you is going to have to remain the same. It makes no sense to change it to sound like how it would in Kannada, for sure. But that said, I think so when I say translating with an accent, it is, to me, it is about retaining, some words here and there, which I just want to locate the English in a certain region. So I was recently asked what English, just like how there are many different kinds of Kannadas, there are many different Englishes as well. So my English falls somewhere in the Bangalore, Mysore, Mangalore region where I grew up and studied. So, and that to me comes across in choices where I retain as many, not as many, obviously you can't sprinkle the text with only Kannada words. So it's about trying to strike a balance there between not putting in too many words, but also keeping some of them. And in examples, like for example, this idiom, this phrase of the grass is greener on the other side. So in Kannada it is Durada Betta Nunnage. And the English equivalent is, of course, the grass is greener on the other side. But I would prefer to translate the Durada Betta Nunnage itself, just to say that it means the same, it has the same meaning, but comes from a different culture where this is how it is interpreted. So those small choices, and for example, also ensuring that the words are transliterated the way we use it here. For example, roti is roti. We don't say roti. We don't say akki roti. We say akki roti here. So in my translation, it would be ROTTI, just to locate these things within a certain socio-political, geographical.
So interesting about the grass is greener, because I know I've read four different translated versions of Flaubert's Madame Bovary, and two of them translate the French cliches into English cliches, and equivalents, and two of them keep it as French, and then you get two different books as a result. When you're working with different writers who use Kannada in different ways, how that's surely the biggest dialect and individual style has to be the biggest challenge.
Absolutely. So there is no one size fits all rule for translating anything. I think. So, for example, I get asked again a lot about my choice not to keep italics and not use footnotes and all that. And I say this, so it worked in this context. I don't want to claim that I'm always going to use this method to translate everything that I translate, because sometimes it might not work. You just absolutely need italics or footnotes in some cases. So it's not a one. So I think it's a very project to project basis. So when there might be texts where trying to translate Durat Betta Nurnage into something equal in English might just not work, and I might have to use the grass is greener on the other side. So these, I think, it's a case to case choice making that goes into.
Now you're someone who is a writer. You have to sort of kill your own self, kill your own voice in the process of impersonating somebody else, or are you comfortable with having a bit of your own voice across translation?
Whether conscious or not, I think the translator brings in a lot of her or his own experiences and reading and understanding of language. It might be far more subtle in some cases, it might be a lot more evident. And so there's always there. It's not because when it's a human translator, it's not a machine that's doing it. There's so much, like what Vivek was saying, it's the use of, when you're talking about language, there's so much that gets that is unsaid, which is also something that you need to translate into the other language. So when that is the case, no, I don't. I always say that I'm led by language, really. So for me, translation is a small part of my creative practice. I also see it as this play between languages, and it's one of the ways in which I express myself through language. Obviously, I mean there's a degree of difference, of course.
Now, as a translator, you're someone who has a lot of power. You can make a book, but you can also ensure that no one reads it. And there are so many books that have been killed in India by bad translations. Is that a power that you sort of very aware of?
I have been aware of that very recently, and I'm still sort of deeply uncomfortable with the complexity of that question. Because, like you said, a bad translator can ensure that a writer is never appreciated or never really well read, and or the other way around. A writer who's maybe not that important in the source language might be out there in the world. So there's so much of politics that goes behind who do you translate, who gets to translate, who gets to be translated. So I think that's a very unsettling power to have, and I think that's where a translator's vast reading and sensitivity has to come into play.
Can I say something to the other? See, when you translate, I think it goes beyond the language. It is not about a word or a phrase. It is about bringing that experience into that language. And I'll give you an example of this. I wrote a story about, in 1992, it was called Riding the Tiger. And the story was set in a corporate house in a training center. And when I wrote that story in Kannada, I was horrified because it read like a translation. Because Kannada, every word was there. Equivalent words were there in Kannada, but Kannada was not ready to take that experience. Till then, that was not written in Kannada. If I write it today, it's different because the language has absorbed in the last 30 years. So similarly, when you translate into English, we are actually bringing that experience into English. What the Ghachar Gochar, if it was translated 30 years ago, and if it was now, it's different because English has grown so much, especially English written in India. The writers writing in English in India have really gained so much of ground because they have been able to capture this experience and enrich the language. That is now available to translators. I think that aspect is very important. How much of this experience that language can take and sustain. So I feel it's not just the language, one has to go beyond that and see what is the experience that is captured in a word.
I want to. Do we have a mic that we can go send around for audience questions? I'm sure we'll have people who want to ask questions. But so I just have one last question for each of you before I open it up to the audience, and that is, you could doesn't necessarily have to be in Kannada. As I said, Vivek's mother tongue is Konkani, and I know reads other languages as well. But if you could nominate a writer or a book that you'd like to see receive a new be translated or receive a new translation because the previous one wasn't, wholly satisfactory. Just give me the first name that comes to mind. Deepa, I'll start with you.
I would say Bendre. I mean, I can only speak about Kannada because that I can't read very well in other languages. Say the poetry of Bendre, I wouldn't envy the job of whoever decides to translate Bendre because it's so complex and so incredible. But I'd love to see a great translation of Bendre's poetry.
Vivek?
I would say Shivram Karanth because he has not been really appreciated beyond Kannada. His English, there are English translations, but they are not good. And the writer, I mean, Karanth is such a powerful writer and has made, his novels have captured very varied experiences. And even in his style, even in his themes, even there are, the magical realism kind of things are there. But he is such a personality. I mean, he was such a personality. For him, writing was only small part of his life. So he never bothered about it. So he kept on doing 100 other things. But I feel now this is a time when we must look at his works and pick up at least 10 of them and present him to the rest of the world.
Okay, who would like to ask the first question? I saw, gentleman at the back over there. It was the person I saw first.
Hello.
Oh, sorry.
I'm at the back here. Wait, I'll come forward.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think, you have the mic. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. I had Sorry. So my question was like, while we're looking at poetry especially, or anything related to descriptive writing, a lot of words and a lot of phrases have a lot of cultural nuance, right? Historical and cultural nuance. How do you bring that into the language you're translating into?
Right. I mean, there are many ways of doing it. Again, if one were to be looking for a literal translation, obviously that's not going to work, especially with poetry. I haven't translated poetry, but then a friend of mine, she's this incredible translator from the Portuguese into English. She had this amazing exercise that she does with her students where she breaks down a poem into fragments, into a formula, and then tackles it. So she says she obviously ends up rewriting writing a completely different poem altogether. So maybe that's one of the ways, but I mean, again, like I said, there's nothing, there's no one size fits all rule when it comes to translating anything. So I think it would be a very case to case.
I mean, Ranjit Hoskote, who's a poet and a translator, always likes to say that you can't have a literal translation because there are no literal originals in poetry. And I think that, you have to have, poetry is a realm of impressionism, and so I think you shouldn't worry too much. Next, I don't know who has the mic.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm somewhere here. It's okay, you can hear me. I came in 10 minutes late, so I'm sorry if this question was already asked, but I'd like to hear your take anyway. My question for Deepa is, for context, when Anant Murthy's Samskara was translated by Ramanujan, something Anant Murthy said was Ramanujan had translated it like an Englishman. So how do you stop yourself from hindering your translation of that work? And my question for Vivek is, elsewhere you had mentioned that your translation is a different book entirely. So what is it like, the very human, visceral experience of being a reader to your own work?
I think I prefer to immerse myself in the text that I'm translating to the extent that the voice of the stories or voice of the author sits in my head when I translate. So I'm pretty good at sort of separating my own writing with so it's like a switch that is that goes on and off. So I haven't so far faced that problem of having to consciously keep myself away from my translations.
See, other than Kannada and English. I know 3 other languages. Apart from these 5 languages, for me, anything else is completely outside of me. I can't understand anything. So, and reading the book in another language, as I said some time ago, it's a different book. So, yeah. I mean, one has to accept it.
Hi, I'm way at the back here, but my question is about how inherently there's been some sort of a bias towards or more like against translations, be it in the awards community or be it in terms of, public perception. That is, of course, changing with the rise of some brilliant translations. But what is your take on how this ground is changing and how people are starting to perceive translations better?
Vic? No? Okay. Because do you think that's true? That there's a bias against translation still?
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so either. In fact, I think translations have always been around. I think they've become more and more popular as everyone wants to read from different cultures.
I think there is a positive bias.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think it's a tricky thing where a community was once discriminated against. A lot of work was done. They are no longer discriminated against, but the narrative can still continue, which is when there's, I think, lack of evidence to still support it. Publishing has, which is one thing we've, I think, done a good job at, is addressing that bias.
because I think the Booker recently had a survey of who's reading translated literature, and I think the majority of the readers were readers below the age of 35. So that's
I think
incredible.
we have time for one final quick question.
Hello, sir. This is Setupati from Bhubaneswar. The subject of your discussion, Bhasha and the world. So, world means which world, which continent, which country, which language. And even today, in this discussion, we are talking English. When AI is available, when I can ask question in my native tongue, you can know it in your native tongue. But we are following English. What is the reason? Number 1. Number 2, is Sahitya Academy is doing any work for translations into Indian languages. That's 2 questions.
Who would like to take the second? I think the second question is what is the Sahitya Academy doing? Have you had any?
Sahitya Academy has a very vibrant translation wing where they commission a lot, they publish and commission and encourage a lot of translations. And this is across, there is one in Kannada and there's one, I should assume there's one in every language, in every state. So,
Vivek, anything to add?
Yeah, Sahitya Academy is doing, Sahitya Academy promotes translations, of course. And Sahitya Academy is focused on Indian languages. And they do, all the award-winning books of the Academy, the 22 books that they give award to, or 24 books every year, all are translated into Indian languages, other languages, also into English. So Academy is not just translating into English, but they also translate into other Indian languages. So there's a lot of work which is being done by Academy, but considering the quantity and the amount of, number of writers, number of writing that is coming in, it is not enough.
Okay, with that, thank you everyone. Thank you Vivek, thank you Deepa. And you will both be available to sign books. Yeah, so you can sign books, and if you didn't get to ask a question here, you can ask them later on.